you get so focused in on the risk management side that we can almost tie ourselves into a knot that prevents ministry from sometimes happening. And as a Christ follower, I say, the answer is prayer. Ask God to reveal to you all as a church how to have that healthy balance of trusting in the Lord and not turning it into anxiety and worry and fear, and yet, again, being wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove with the procedures you put into place.
When it comes to the worst case scenario, what's the difference between reacting and responding? How does a ministry prepare itself for the unexpected? These are questions that really speak to safety and security for ministries. When it comes to doing ministry, one of the core responsibilities is making sure that the people who are served by your ministry are safe, protected, and thriving while they're there. So we're going to talk about this with my friend Ben Johnson. He's the managing partner of Lightwell in the state of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama, and he has 37 years of experience doing exactly this, tooling up ministries to protect the people that they serve. Let's get right into our conversation with Ben. Well, it is my pleasure to have Ben Johnson on the podcast for the first time. He is the managing partner of Lightwell in the state of Tennessee and also Kentucky and Alabama. Ben, thank you so much for being with us today.
Adam, it's always a joy to hang out with you, bro.
I feel the very same. So we'll cover a lot of ground in this podcast, specifically on the area of safety and security, but I kind of want to get to that by sharing a little bit more about your background with serving ministries. You've been in the great state of Tennessee your whole life and been serving ministries there with insurance solutions for how long?
For 37 years.
Oh, my
Started in 1988. You probably weren't even born yet.
I was too. 3 years old. I'm a proud 85er.
So yeah, it's been a little while in the industry.
Wow, that's amazing. And I happen to know also that you are not the first generation in your family that's been doing this. So this is actually a thing that you've gotten from your dad. He started this business.
Yes. Yeah, Dad started the agency in 1964.
So in those several decades now of serving ministries, you have become somewhat a specialist in equipping and training ministries for safety and security needs. How did that happen? How did you sort of identify that need and gravitate toward being someone who comes alongside ministries to equip them?
So starting around the year of 2000 is when nationally church shootings actually started exponentially increasing. And unfortunately, in July of 2008, there was a shooting at a church here in Knoxville at a Unitarian Universalist church where 2 people were killed and 6 others were wounded. And since that happened right in our backyard, the requests and the questions that were being asked by ministries was happening in every single ministry. Why did this happen? Could this happen in our ministry? And it was absolutely, the answer to that was yes. And so they started reaching out to us and we started reaching out to them to give advice and recommendations. And that's why it became so critical and important in our area. And that's why I got more involved in it.
Yeah, that is very sad, and that does make sense. But now you've been tracking this and training on this for the last 17 years or so. So in that time, what trends are you seeing kind of emerging that face ministries in a unique way when it comes to security?
So typically what I've seen is that when we get contacted by a ministry, when it comes to safety or security, the majority of the time they're asking about what do we do in regards to creating a team that'll help us with an active shooter situation. And I believe the main reason that happens is because when it does happen, it gets so much media attention that it gets put on the front of everybody's mind. And so they start thinking about it and want to, respond to that, which is not wrong by any stretch, but it does make it to where that's usually the lead that pulls us in. And then from there, what I have found to be very interesting is when I go to meet with a ministry team or leadership to help them develop a team or talk through what they're already doing, again, the focus is on active shooters, but I'll pose the question, what's most likely to happen this Sunday? An active shooter coming in or somebody having a heart attack in a service. Actually, case in point, one of my best friends died at church a few years ago, and yet he was resuscitated at the church because they had a medical security team there to take care of his need and his situation.
Wow.
So we pose questions like that. We also pose the question, what's more likely to happen this Sunday, an active shooter or a natural disaster weather situation, tornado or whatever. And so that's not to belittle the need to prepare for an active shooter, but it does put into a balance and helps the leadership team start thinking more outside of the box they were in regards to the fact that church safety is not just an active shooter. It's also managing your finances of the church and protecting it against embezzlement, against security issues, cyber issues, all those other factors that can come into play too.
I mean, if you start with the extreme, all of your training is going to feel extreme. But if you work your way back down toward the ground level of what does happen every week or what could happen any given week, then you're able to work your way out toward that extreme and put it in its proper context. So I really appreciate the way you're flipping that, kind of making
Yeah.
it more real in the daily. So then what does that mean for training? Like, how do you coach ministries up to train their volunteers and staff for the everyday, working their way out toward those extreme situations?
So again, when it is the extreme and they're focused in on the active shooter scenario, I'll usually meet with the guys that are at the church that are most interested in protecting in that way. And so to again take them outside of that box, I'll mention those questions that I just asked. Then I'll say, first steps are you all need to probably expand your team to more than just the guys that are super interested in physical safety at the church. Um, you all serving in that capacity is fantastic, but the perspective you're going to have for church safety and security is going to be dramatically different from that nursery worker who sees an angle and a perspective that you're not going to see, or from somebody that's sitting in the choir loft. Their perception and perspective of safety and security is going to be different from yours as well too. Or again, that church secretary that's here on Monday through Friday, while you all are focusing again primarily on Sundays and possibly Wednesdays. And so create a team that is well balanced and a diverse group of individuals across your congregation is the first thing I recommend that they do. And then the second thing I recommend they do is to play what I call the what if game. What if this happened at our church, or what could happen if this occurred? What if there was an active shooter? Could that happen in our church? Yes or no? What if there is a tornado warning? What would we do? How would we respond? So play that what if game for the scenarios that could happen and then rank them on likelihood of possibility of occurring and address the ones that are most likely to happen in your ministry first, to take care of those big picture, most likely scenarios and address them, and then work your way down the list. And you can also look at the severity of something happening as well too, not just the likelihood and the frequency, but also the severity. So obviously an active shooter situation is an extremely severe situation that you have to address. But again, put it into balance in regards to frequency and severity in conjunction with that.
That's really good. And I'll bet, I would just imagine that has to feel like a very empowering exercise for a ministry team because they may not even have thought about what those what if questions are and how to prioritize those based on frequency and severity. But once they've gotten that laid out, let's say they've met as a team, they've gotten it laid out. Here's the most frequent or most severe. Here's what we care about the most. We've got a team that represents the diverse areas of the church and where those risks might show up. How often does training need to happen? What's the ideal kind of cadence of keeping people apprised of the policies and procedures and moves that need to be made?
Well, what I can say based on my past experience is that a lot of churches get excited and gung ho about creating some form of a safety or security program for whatever aspect they're building, whether it be child protection program for their children's ministry or again, a medical team that they develop. And there's this excitement and passion that gets it built. And then what do we do as humans? We kind of put that up on the shelf, and then we go back eventually into our normal routine, and we don't even follow what we said we were going to do, just because, again, life happens. We get distracted by other things. And so it is super important to, implement and adopt procedures that you're going to be able to do short term and long term, so that, if there are seasons and times when you can't or don't have the ability to do follow up training or reassess, and it just becomes a part of your DNA, then it takes away some of that risk and that balance. But for most ministry situations, if you've got a team developed, typically if they're serious about keeping that on the fronts of their minds, they're meeting once a quarter, maybe even once a month. So again, depending on the size of the ministry and the scope of the exposures, large churches with child programs, schools, things like that, they're going to be more involved and meeting more regularly versus a church that maybe is a Sunday and Wednesday only type ministry.
That totally makes sense. And it's actually a really good segue to something I'm curious about. So much of what you mentioned has to do with mindset and not just, you need a certain guy or you need a certain set of people in order to make this happen. It's really just changing your mindset to be more aware of security issues, make sure everybody knows what they should do if a certain thing happens. So for if there's a smaller ministry that's listening to this or a ministry leader from a church that doesn't have that kind of staffing or budget, are there low cost or no cost things that you would encourage a smaller ministry to do that makes them more aware of this mindset shift today?
Yes, absolutely. Low cost, no cost is very easy and practical to do for the majority of ministries out there. Most ministries don't have the ability or the funds to, maybe hire off-duty police officers to come in and patrol their property regularly and things like that. So, first and the easiest one is to contact your local Lightwell agent. We have resources, information, technology that's available to share with ministries. And again, it's not just for the active shooter, it's for every gamut of ministry. Brotherhood puts together a book called The Big Book of Checklist, which is a fantastic resource that's free and available to all ministries out there that can really help them get the knowledge of what they need to be asking about and for. And then other free resources is most EMTs, fire departments, and police offices and departments are willing to come and do a walkthrough of your premises
Hmm.
for most ministries. So check with your local authorities, and in most cases, they would be more than happy to come in and sit down and do a risk assessment, maybe walk through, give their advice and recommendations as well.
Okay, so another aspect that I commonly think of or even hear about when it comes to safety and security is the idea of background checks, making sure that your volunteers and your staff have a thorough background check conducted on them. What is your opinion or your recommendation when it comes to background checks for ministries?
So I'm going to turn it back on you and say, what's the definition of a background check? You're not going to be able to give me one
I
because
really
there's
won't.
not a legal answer to that question. There is no legal definition to a background check. A background check could be you checking Ben Johnson to confirm his mailing address. So therefore, that's a background check. All the way to the other end of the spectrum where you've got the FBI knocking on my door and I'm answering 6 million questions to confirm who I am and what I do. So that's part of the issue that we've seen over the years that churches and ministries run into when it comes to the background checks. If you go online and say, I want to do a background check, you're going to get thousands and thousands of companies out there that will say they'll do a background check. But again, there's no true legal definition of what a background check is. So it's very important that you work with your current insurance agent to confirm which companies they know have a good, reputable background check company that will do valid checks that are beyond just checking an address and maybe, seeing if something's showing up on a public website and that's it. So That's super critical. And I want to add to the fact that, and again, everybody understands for the most part the importance of background checks. But in working with the FBI the last several years, I was in a meeting with them a while back where we asked them the question about background checks and how successful they are in finding the bad guys, the criminals. So we posed the question to them this way. We asked them, how many do you all have any data or information in regards to how many interactions a pedophile has with their victim or victims before they actually have a criminal record? And they said, yeah, we have stats on that. It's about 125 interactions with their victim or victims before they're caught and actually have a criminal record that would show up on a background check. So that means there's a lot of criminals that don't have a criminal record. And so a background check will confirm if they got that record, but it doesn't mean it's always going to catch those criminals. So what we've seen as being extremely important as much as a background check is reference checks. Checking on Ben Johnson. You know, when I fill out an application to work with your youth or children's ministry, if I list references and former ministries that I've served with and their children's ministries, and that ministry checks on Ben Johnson and says, hey, tell me about Ben Johnson. You know, some will say, man, we wish he was still serving here with us. That's a great sign, right? If they respond with, well, Ben Johnson, yeah, I don't know that he's got the best gifts of working with children or, he served here for a little while, but, there wasn't much, more to say beyond that. That could be a potential red flag as to should I be allowed to serve in that capacity? And that doesn't always mean that I'm a criminal. It just may mean that I don't have the spiritual gifts to work with that group. Maybe I don't have the gift of teaching or serving in that capacity. So there's some beauty in helping the church thrive and grow and getting people into the right roles and positions while you're creating these safety and security programs.
That's really good because you had me sufficiently terrified with the first half of that answer about, the lack of consistency with a definition of around background checks, but the alternative then of reference checks, making a priority of them, listing references and then following up with those references and doing a thorough job of that is a much more connected and empowering kind of move that a ministry can make to fill in the holes that could be left by a background check. Am I hearing that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen ministries that, again, have tried to turn the processes of serving the kids and protecting the people into a positive from a spiritual
Yes.
standpoint. That on that application, they ask, tell us why you feel led to be involved in this ministry. And they get a word of testimony from Adam Clark or whoever it is that God really is pulling him in this direction. And what does that do? That encourages the entire body of Christ, which is just fantastic, obviously. And so it makes a ritual, routine activity of legalism and protection turn into something that brings glory and honor to God. So it's pretty cool when that
That
happens.
is very cool. That's outstanding. And to call back to what you were saying before about training security teams, are you going to have kids ministry every Sunday? Absolutely. Are you going to have volunteers that work in those classrooms every Sunday? For sure. And so training for the what seem like mundane things is so much more real and present to the risks that a ministry has all the time than if you just said, let's just make sure you're ready for an active shooter situation.
Yeah.
Super
And it
important, of
sends
course, but man, not
yeah.
definitely not as regular.
And it sends a great message to the community that ministry is serving. If that community knows that the people that are working with my kids have been screened, background checked, confirmed with references, they've gone through a process of confirming that, yeah, Ben Johnson really has the gift of working with children. And so he needs to be in that middle school class, not just because he's immature like them, but actually because he can actually, hopefully bless and encourage them as well too. Um, then what's kind of message does that send to those parents or to that community that, yeah, they have people here that are trained to equip and equipped to help in whatever situation comes up, whether it be a natural disaster or a medical emergency or an active shooter disturbance.
I love that. We've talked a lot on this podcast in different ways about what stewardship really means, because I think it's very easy to think of stewardship as saving money or, being fiscally responsible. But stewarding the protection of children is probably the most sacred duty of a ministry, to make sure that vulnerable people who can't protect themselves are protected by a ministry when they walk through those doors. That's stewardship. And so that
Yeah.
gets me fired up to hear the way you're talking about that. And okay, so that does also speak to, what role do you play, Ben? What role does insurance play when it comes to safety and security for ministries? How can they lean on a quality insurance policy for this?
Yeah. So everybody's heard the statement, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. There's a healthy balance with risk management tools and having these things in place. And then the pound of cure being when the bad thing happens, in spite of all of your efforts and life just happens, you've got an insurance policy and coverage and a insurance agent and a claims adjuster that is there to help you walk through that process and make sure you're properly protected. So you can have all the great checks and balances in place. But again, sometimes life is still just going to happen and you did everything right. But again, life happens and all of a sudden you got a legal issue that you've got to have addressed that an insurance policy can help you with. So that's why you got to make sure as a part of your risk management review, it includes a review of making sure you've got the appropriate coverages in your insurance policy to address if there is an active shooter and one of your safety team members, restrains them or creates an issue where people that saw or experienced it all of a sudden are traumatized, and now they're trying to pursue the church legally in that way as well too. So
So yeah, can you dial in what are some aspects of a quality insurance policy related to security or traumatic incident response that a ministry should make sure and ask about or have in their program?
yeah, absolutely. There's two key areas that I would say any church that is serious about making sure they've got that legal protection, they need to make sure that they've got coverage similar to something called security operations liability, which obviously protects the church. And if it's a good policy, it'll be broad enough to cover the volunteers that are acting on behalf of the church while serving in that capacity of providing safety and security. And so that's your foundational item that you want to have. And then again, because life can happen, and maybe your ministry did not do anything wrong whatsoever, but your church still experiences a traumatic incident, an active shooter that does come in and cause problems. Even though you might not be liable when that happens, people have been impacted by that. And so there's a coverage that great insurance companies will provide called traumatic incident response coverage that basically helps the individuals that were traumatized by what occurred, whether it be additional medical expenses they've had, lost wages because they can't work, or they need counseling. Those types of things are things that traditionally aren't addressed by your standard normal insurance policy, but those are things that can definitely be put on a good policy for ministries.
That's excellent. Okay, so this might be a tricky question. When a ministry has adopted a really proactive, secure posture toward protecting their ministry, how do they balance that with wanting to be a welcoming and inviting and loving atmosphere for people who need church, who come in and maybe they're a stranger to the people there or most of the people there, but they need a place to feel welcome and loved? How do you help a church balance that posture?
Yeah, that's a great question that comes up quite regularly because, again, with what I've been doing the last 37 years, I have this risk management hat on that sees and experiences and looks for worst case scenarios. And I've seen them play out. And so when I'm meeting with ministries that have that same mindset that they're trying to focus in on the church, sometimes you get so focused in on the risk management side that we can almost tie ourselves into a knot that prevents ministry from sometimes happening. And so there's this healthy balance of how do we be wise as serpents and gentle as doves in a world where we live in a fallen world where we've got to be like Nehemiah and his team when they were rebuilding the wall, and yet they had a sword on their hip. It's a tough thing to answer. And as a Christ follower, I say, the answer is prayer. Ask God to reveal to you all as a church how to have that healthy balance of trusting in the Lord and not turning it into anxiety and worry and fear. And yet, again, being wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove, with the procedures you put into place. And we'll do as your insurance agent and risk management advisor everything we can to educate you so that you can make that wise decision on what's the healthy balance, and where do we need to land, and trusting in the Lord, relying on Him, but yet also having policies and procedures in place that can protect us as well too. So
I love that. And there's something in that that should feel like every ministry has a question or a lot of questions to answer for themselves. And there's not one answer to those questions. How big should our team be? How much equipment should they have? Should they be armed? All of those questions, they don't have one answer. They have a different answer for every ministry based on their posture, their sensibilities, what they want, but they have to also know the risks or the benefits of each one of those kind of spots they could land on that continuum. And I really like the thought that, like, all right, let's be prayerful about this, let's be wise about this, and let's kind of own the posture that we've decided to take as a ministry for how strict that may be or how loose that may be. What are the risks and benefits on wherever we fall with that?
yeah, and when we've worked with the FBI in the past and done active shooter seminars where they've come in and helped lead some of the training, that's one of the questions that does come up for churches is what's the cookie cutter answer for all the churches that are represented here in this room? And everybody that's in leadership says there's not one because every church has its own unique and diverse ways of doing ministry. Even their facilities in and of themselves can create different risks and exposures from one church to the next. So it definitely is a customized need for every single ministry out there. There's not a cookie cutter answer for, all the risk management issues that are
That's
out
good.
there.
Well, and it's another reason to have a really good insurance agent in your corner who can help you think about this from a professional insurance standpoint, because you can only answer those questions to the extent that you are aware of that within your ministry. Having the advocacy of someone who understands that market is really important. So I don't know if you'll have these kind of things ready, but a couple of stories, both on the positive and negative side. Have you ever seen a situation where proper risk prevention or a security team did its job and kept something bad from happening within a ministry?
Yes, and I've seen where they have not done the appropriate thing and bad things have
That's
happened
the other
too.
side of
So
that coin. I don't know if you've got a story for each.
I do actually. For the first one where there could have been a really bad scenario, this was a situation where in church security, there was a young man, teenager-ish age, that came into the sanctuary for worship right when the service began, wearing a hoodie, went down and sat down right at the second row on the end of the row, um, did not communicate with anybody during the greeting time, did not get up and shake anybody's hand. He was just because of his actions was leaving a major red flag concern for the security team. And what they could have done is they could have overreacted to the situation and gone to him and asked him to leave or tried to address him before he did anything wrong whatsoever, which would have been obviously a potential liability exposure for the ministry. Um, so what they did wisely is there was one seat in front of the young man that was open, so they sent one of their security individuals to go sit in front of him, but they couldn't obviously see what the young man was doing behind him. So it was still a very tense situation. But thankfully, they had another security individual that was able to come and sit behind him, not immediately, but in an area where he could respond if needed, if something came up. And so during the music, he would not get up and stand with everybody else. It was, again, just a super intense situation because nobody knew who he was, didn't recognize him. And thankfully, um, He did not respond in any kind of physical, active way. But those gentlemen that were on that team were able to go to him after the service and just introduce themselves and be a little bit honest and transparent with them and say, "Hey, are you okay?" And it created an opportunity for that ministry security team to actually spend some time in prayer, encouraging that young man in his situation because he was going through a very difficult situation, and he was transparent enough to share with them what was going on, and they were able to encourage him. So that was a great positive response that turned into something beautiful for the kingdom for that young man.
So great.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, again, not naming names or airing anybody's laundry, but are you aware of a situation where we missed an opportunity to be more in tune with or protective of a ministry?
Yeah, this was a few years ago for a ministry that we work with that informed me that they were going to be doing a mission trip to Nairobi, or not to Nairobi, but just to Africa, to Kenya. And I told them about some risk management resources and tools. I told them about our Faith Ventures insurance policy that can help if there was a medical emergency or a need for evacuation and things of that nature. And a few weeks later, I got a call from the pastor. He was calling me from Africa, and he said, "Ben, you told us about this insurance policy we could have purchased. We didn't purchase it. Is there any other kind of coverage available or out there that's already included in our policy? Because we had one of our church members pass away last night on this mission trip." And I said, "Unfortunately, there's not. That's why we had this Faith Ventures policy available to help with the situation." So what happened is that mission trip totally got stopped. The pastor had to deal with the Kenyan government, the U.S. Embassy, had to be the one communicating with the family, 10-hour time difference or whatever, back to the U.S., had to figure out a way to get the body back to the U.S. And again, it just stopped all ministry from happening versus if they had purchased, this policy that at the time was maybe $30. It would have taken care of all communication. It would have taken care of repatriation. They would have had professional staff dealing with the whole situation so that, again, that wouldn't have fallen on the pastor or the mission team there. They could have continued to minister however necessary. And so, yeah, that was a very, very difficult learning experience
Oh,
for
that's
that
very
ministry.
unfortunate. I'm sad to hear that,
Yeah.
of course. Ben, we're nearing the end of our time together, and I've got a couple more questions, but let me just lead with, is there anything that you want to make sure gets said to ministries? Maybe it's a piece of advice or a place you would, first recommend them to go for resources. Yeah, just kind of open question there. What would you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest item that I stress to ministries that maybe don't have safety and security as much on their radar, I basically tell them, okay, when something that does happen, you're going to have to respond to it no matter what, whether you're equipped or not. So, my request to you all is to get to a place where you don't react to a situation, respond to the situation, have that plan of action in place. And again, playing the what if scenario, figuring out, okay, what will we do if this happens? Make sure we've got the appropriate team of individuals in our church, our ministry that understand the different dynamics of how to respond to that. Get to a place where you're responding to a situation, not reacting to a situation.
Well, that's very good. Okay, a couple other quick items before we're done. I saw that back in 2022, you had a really cool recognition from the FBI in your local area. And you've mentioned a couple times during this conversation partnering with the FBI. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I know this isn't something you're looking for, but how did that recognition come about? What was it? And what did that mean to you for the role you've taken in your local area?
Yeah. So with the, again, desire and the need to help ministries in our area, especially with the attention on active shooter situations, we started working locally with the FBI through our agency to put on active shooter seminars led by the FBI. And we've done dozens of those over the years. And so it caught the attention of the leadership with the FBI. When we've done those, we've had about over 280 different ministries participate with over 1,200 attendees from those ministries. And so each year, the director of the FBI gives out the Director's Community Leadership Award that basically is given to individuals or to organizations who've contributed to strengthening their communities and reducing crime and violence. And so our agency won that award for the FBI Knoxville or East Tennessee regional office at that time. And so it was obviously an honor. It was not expected. They did most of the work. They were the ones leading the seminars. I was the one that was obviously letting ministries know about it and getting the word out. And then obviously we would share what I've shared some of today, about risk management and insurance needs in the midst of all that. And so while we were in Washington, D.C. to experience the award ceremony and all that, there was about 100 of us there from across the country that had won the award. And so we're outside the J. Edgar Hoover building right in the middle of D.C., right at a major intersection. And so, they're not going to let us just walk in, right? It's the FBI headquarters. So we had to go through a whole bunch of security stuff. There was a whole bunch of FBI agents out there wearing their, coat and tie and suits and, looking like FBI, right? But they're being casual with us. They're smiling and congratulating us and all that kind of stuff. And it was like the perfect storm for me that this happened. Right when we were all at that street corner, there was a huge explosion that happened right at the intersection. And as soon as that explosion happened, it was like a light switch with these FBI
Wow.
agents we were all around. Their features changed. They started putting their hand inside of their coat in case they needed to pull something out.
Mm-hmm.
I started to go look at the intersection, what was going on, and my wife, Carla, she grabbed me and pulled me back because I was like, what just happened? So, they just went to immediate high alert, which was so cool to see.
Yeah.
And it was cool because nothing bad happened,
Yeah,
okay?
right.
Now, if it'd been traumatic and all that, then whatever. But what happened is there was a city bus that was driving through that intersection, and perfect timing, a tire blew out right where we're all standing out there. It was like a gift from God to
Oh,
me just to see them do what they do,
that's awesome.
right there on the spot. And then as a part of the FBI Citizens Academy that I've gotten to be a part of, it was really cool to get to go to like the shooting range and watch these guys do what they do. They showed us how to make explosives out of common household goods. Not that we're going to do that, but just all this kind of stuff is really cool to get to work with them. We're going to a forensics meeting here in a couple of weeks with the FBI to learn more about forensics, and got to go to the airport and do a behind the scenes security review of what's going on with the FBI out there. So,
Yeah.
really cool stuff.
That's amazing.
Really cool stuff.
And something that, I'll bet the version of you from 37 years ago couldn't have ever imagined those kind of opportunities as a
No way.
result of just wanting to take good care of ministries. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
No way. Yeah. Anytime you can get a free trip to Washington, D.C. and hang out with the director of the FBI
Yeah.
for a day, that was really, really fun and really cool. And go into the J. Edgar Hoover building and
Wow.
all that kind of stuff. It was a lot of fun.
That's amazing. And always good to find yourself on the right side of a trip to Washington to meet with the FBI. That's good. That's good work, and very well deserved, Ben. Congratulations on that. But then also, as we wrap up, I just want to say, to kind of peel back the curtain personally a little bit, we got the chance to talk with one of the ministries that you serve in Tennessee, Wares Valley Ranch, on one of our previous episodes of the podcast. He
Yeah.
obviously spoke very highly of you, but I also have family in East Tennessee. Two uncles that are pastors, and one that leads a camp down there that also work with you. And they have had so many good experiences of your care right alongside your professionalism, but your actual care for the thriving and the success and the protection of their ministry. So I just want to say, on behalf of the Lightwell podcast and the ministries that I know you work with, I'm really thankful that you're out there doing the things that you're doing, Ben. I really, really am.
Well, thank you and praise the Lord. He gets all the glory and the credit for sure.
Amen. Amen. And so Ben
Yeah.
Johnson, managing partner of Lightwell in the state of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama, thank you so much for your presence here today on the Lightwell podcast and the things you're doing for ministries.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for what you all are doing to encourage the kingdom.
Of course. My thanks once again to Ben Johnson, managing partner of Lightwell in the states of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama, for his 37 years and going of experience serving ministries there. My thought is, to the extent that I'm speaking on behalf of the Lightwell podcast and Lightwell more generally, when you interact with Ben Johnson, you are interacting with exactly what we want Lightwell to feel like. His heart for ministries is enormous. And so I hope that you felt that through this conversation, and that you, if you are a ministry leader, feel equipped to take the next step with resourcing your ministry for safety and security. I know he mentioned some resources there. A great place to start with connecting with those resources or a Lightwell agent in your area is to go to lightwell.com. So until then, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the podcast. Let's go and let it shine.